All right, let's talk about something we all get told is a good thing, being tidy. But what if I told you that our obsession with order might actually be holding us back? Yeah, you heard that right. Let's dive in and see how. So, you know Benjamin Franklin, right? The guy on the $100 bill. Inventor, statesman, basically the poster child for productivity. But you know what his biggest struggle was? The one thing he just couldn't crack? Keeping his desk tidy. Seriously, he wrote in his own memoirs that it drove him crazy, so much so that he was about ready to just give up on being orderly altogether. Kinda sounds familiar, doesn't it? You know, we all have this built-in idea that a tidy desk means a tidy mind. And Franklin, well, he definitely bought into that. But here's a wild thought. What if he was totally wrong? What if one of the most productive guys in history was worrying about the wrong thing? And what if that very mess he was trying so hard to get rid of was secretly part of his genius? Okay, to really get this, I've got a story for you, and it starts back in 1975. Picture this, a 17-year-old concert promoter in Germany, a woman named Vera Brandis. She's about to have what is, without a doubt, the worst day of her professional life. So Vera had booked a true legend, the jazz pianist Keith Jarrett. Huge deal. But when Jarrett shows up for the sound check, the piano is a total disaster. I mean, it's tiny, it's out of tune, keys are broken, the pedals are sticking. It's a complete wreck. He takes one look, says, "Nope, unplayable," and walks out. Vera is devastated. She literally chases him out into the rain, begging him to play for the sold-out crowd. And finally, he gives in. He says, "Never forget, I'm only doing this for you." So he goes on stage, forced to wrestle with this terrible, messy instrument. And what happens next is just incredible. He creates something completely new, a sound he never would have found otherwise. And that recording, it becomes the best-selling solo jazz album of all time. So just let that sink in for a second. That disastrous piano wasn't just some obstacle he had to overcome. No, it was the reason for the masterpiece. It was the raw material. The chaos, the limitations, the sheer mess of it all. That's what forced him onto this brilliant new path that he never, ever would have planned to take. And look, this isn't just about some happy accident, right? It turns out mess can actually be a deliberate strategy for finding new ideas. To see how that works, we need to talk about one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. This guy right here, that's Brian Eno. And back in the 70s, when he was in the studio producing for people like, David Bowie, he came up with this really strange tool. It was his secret weapon for when the creativity just wasn't flowing. It was a simple deck of cards, but its whole purpose was to deliberately inject mess and randomness right into the super controlled world of a recording studio. He called them the oblique strategies. And here's how it worked. Whenever the band got stuck in a rut, Eno would just pull out a card. The instruction might be something weird, like emphasize the flaws, or maybe change instrument roles. Can you imagine? One of the world's best guitarists, a guy named Carlos Alomar, was told he had to go play the drums. The musicians? Oh, they usually hated it. But you can't argue with the results. This messy, frustrating process led to some of the absolute best, most iconic albums of that decade. And when Eno explained it himself, he really hit the nail on the head. He said the whole point was to create alertness. His exact words were that the cards put us in a messier situation. And when you're in a mess, you're forced to pay attention differently. You're not on autopilot anymore because, well, you're completely off the map. So what we're really talking about here are two totally different ways to solve a problem. You've got the tidy way, which we can call hill climbing. Imagine you're on a small hill. You just take small, safe steps up to get to the top. It's efficient, right? But the problem is you might be on the wrong hill. You might never even see that Mount Everest is right over there. Then you have the messy method, random leaps. This is what Eno's cards do. They force you to take a huge, disruptive jump to a completely new spot on the map. Now, yeah, it's risky. You could land in a valley, but you could also land at the base of a much, much bigger mountain. A breakthrough the tidy approach would have completely missed. Okay, so this idea isn't just for solo artists in a studio. It actually scales up in a big way to entire teams, whole companies, and it really challenges how we think about teamwork. So, sociologists have a couple of terms for this. First, there's bonding capital. Think of this as the tidy approach. A perfect example is the British Olympic rowing team from 2000. They basically locked themselves away from the world to focus, build team spirit, and guess what? They won a surprise gold medal. It's amazing for getting things done. But if you want innovation, you need something else. You need bridging capital. This is the messy approach. And the ultimate example is this mathematician, Paul Erdos. He was a genius who never stayed in one place. He was always traveling, always collaborating, connecting different people from different fields. He was the human internet, creating these messy connections that sparked breakthroughs that just couldn't happen inside a neat, tidy, isolated team. You want to know one of the most innovative places of the entire 20th century? Well, it perfectly represents this whole messy idea. And it wasn't some shiny, futuristic lab. Nope, it was a cheap, ugly, temporary building at MIT. And everyone just called it Building 20. Building 20 was... it was the perfect storm of productive mess. It was this wooden shack, basically, thrown up during World War II and was supposed to be temporary. The layout was so bizarre that people were always getting lost just wandering into labs and departments that weren't their own. But that was its magic. You had nuclear scientists literally bumping into linguists. You had the freaking Model Railroad Club right next to top-secret electronics research. And all these random, messy encounters created this incredible environment where new ideas just sparked. And you know what its greatest strength was? The fact that it was a dump. Seriously, because it was ugly and cheap and everyone thought it was temporary, nobody cared what you did in there. You wanted to knock down a wall? Go for it. Rewire your own lab? No problem. In the fancy, pristine buildings, you couldn't do any of that. But in Building 20, they had total freedom. And that freedom to be messy, to experiment, that was the secret sauce. Okay, so we've seen how mess can be a superpower for creativity, right? For innovation. But this brings us to the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. It turns out our bias against mess isn't just misguided, it can be genuinely dangerous. So if being messy can be so good for us, what's the actual danger of being too tidy? And look, the problem isn't having a clean desk. That's not it. The real danger is something way deeper. The real danger is an obsession with tidiness. It's when we start to believe that mess isn't just inefficient, but that it's somehow morally wrong. And when people believe that, they'll do some pretty extraordinary things to get those nice, neat, tidy results. Let me give you a crazy example. There was this social psychologist, Diederik Stapel. He published a study that went viral. It claimed that messy places actually make people more prejudiced. It was perfect, right? It fed right into our bias that mess is bad. But there was just one tiny problem. The entire study was a fraud, a complete fake. He made up all the data. And this is where it gets truly unbelievable, the ultimate irony. When Stapel confessed, he explained why he faked it. He said he was obsessed with the beauty of neat, tidy data, the kind of clean results that academic journals just love to publish. And get this, he describes fabricating the data while sitting all alone in his perfectly, tastefully furnished, immaculately tidy office. His obsession with order, with tidiness, literally led him to commit one of the biggest scientific frauds in recent history. So look, the point of all this isn't that you should just go be disorganized for the sake of it. Of course not. It's about recognizing that the clean, predictable, tidy path, it isn't always the best one. It's about embracing that productive discomfort. Leaning into the messy challenge, whether it's an unplayable piano or a random card from a deck, because that's what pushes us. That's what leads to real breakthroughs. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question. Think about your own life, your work, your projects, the teams you're on. Are you always sticking to that tidy, comfortable path? And just ask yourself, where could a little more mess, a little productive chaos, create a real breakthrough for you?